Thank you. You're here for the pensions. It says Pensions Fund Board. Is that our title now?
As part of the sort of general refresher of governance, as part of going unitary, someone decided that we needed that pension board was indistinct, so we are now pension fund and board and pension fund committee. Both been funded.
We've been funded. Fantastic. Excellent. Hopefully you've all had a chance to review the papers for today's meeting. Oh, we have another attendee.
Two more.
Morning, morning. Morning. Sit wherever, and then we'll get your name tags in the right place. So Great, we haven't really started. So
we now have full attendance.
We now have full attendance. Wow. So first item on the agenda then is a bit moot. Apologies for absence, and I understand we have no apologies for absence. Rachel has mentioned that she is attending remotely because she's not very well. So thank you for attending remotely, Rachel. Section 2, we have declarations of interest. Now, I understand all of our declared interests are registered as a standing item on the agenda. But as we have another face in the room, Simon, so any declarations of interest, people that are a member of the pension fund have made that declaration. So we don't need to re-declare that each time we meet. But Simon, are there any declarations of interest?
Yeah, I do have a Somerset County Council pension of £55 a month, I think it is.
Fantastic. Well, that's good that you've got a vested interest.
I believe Liz has a swear jar. I've been told Liz has a swear jar because you used the unallowed word.
What, county council? We're not allowed to do that one.
No, we are now Somerset Council.
Somerset Council.
It was suggested that we might be able to pay off the council's debt with your swear jar by the rate it's going.
Excellent. So no further additional declarations of interest. Thank you. So item number 3 on the agenda is minutes from our previous meeting. So again, hopefully you've had a chance to review them. I will just briefly go through them page by page, just to make sure that there's nothing there that anyone wants to question or query. So they start in our pack on page 11 of our pack. The reason I'm saying our pack is a substantial amount of our meeting is reviewing what the pensions committee meeting have discussed. So I will keep alternating between the two packs. So in our last meeting, which was on the 20th of January, we reviewed the pension committee previous meeting, which was on their meeting was on the 16th of December. And we also reviewed the risk register, and we reviewed our business plan. So those are standing items on our agenda. We will always do that. A substantial amount of our meeting last time was looking at the actuarial valuation. It says variation in our minutes, but I think it was our valuation that we were looking at. The other item that we looked at was the knowledge and skills. How's that going, Anton?
I've slightly, and I made this comment at the pensions committee on the basis that we have Simon as a new member here and 2 new members of the pensions committee. I wanted to sort of get them into the fold before I started lurching off on sort of the skills and knowledge framework and our assessment, etc., etc. I need to check with Barnett Waddingham whether the questionnaire is still open, so that I can encourage those new members and indeed any that haven't previously managed to get round to it to just fill that in. So I just need to check with that. So it's intentionally slightly held to get the
Yes.
the new members up to speed and started, and then we can take you all forward together.
What might be useful, just as a bit of an amnesty for any of us who haven't managed to do that questionnaire yet, it really is useful if we've got a good understanding of collectively where the gaps in our knowledge are. So if you haven't had a chance to do it yet, please do have a look at it. So Anton, I wonder if you could just do a block email to everybody, and then that doesn't highlight anybody's name in particular, just to remind people that it is still there, hopefully, and give everybody a further grace period where they could complete the questionnaire. That might be a good idea.
I will take it under advisement, but once, as I say,
Yes.
I gave Simon and Councillor Mike Hewiton a training session last week, and there's 2 others who couldn't make last week that I need to sweep up.
Yes.
Councillors Dunk and Fothergill, who have joined committee.
Excellent. Fantastic. So does anyone have any comments or queries about our last meeting minutes? I'm not seeing anyone, so excellent. We will therefore move on to our next item, which is public question time. Do we have any questions from the public?
No.
No, I noticed Sigurd's at the back of the room. Hello, Sigurd, but just attending today, no questions. Fantastic. So our next item is now to review the pensions committee papers. As I said, I've got a copy of the pension committee papers, but I think probably the best way for us to deal with their papers, Anton, I wonder if you'd mind leading us through their meeting, which was on
16th of March, was it?
16th of March.
Yes, I should.
10th of March.
10th
I've got
of
10th of March. Yeah.
That sounds right. So I'll just try and remember the key points as ever, and stop me whenever you have any questions. There's the standing item on Somerset Unitary. I updated the committee that as part of the overall review, it had been decided that the pensions committee would be increased by 2 councillors, so from a level of 8 in total to 10, with actually 3 new councillors, because the previous district's rep fell into disrepair, and therefore 2 new councillors for the expanded numbers and a replacement for the district's rep. So otherwise, the terms of reference as discussed at board and committee earlier in the year had been adopted by the new council as part of the constitution wrap up. That had been approved by full council at whichever meeting that was.
And I think the only, I know it's on our terms of reference, but I think the only thing that changed materially in our terms of reference is the chair doesn't have to be here in order to make it quorum. Is that right?
Yes, that was the only sort of noticeable change to the committee's terms of reference, and for the board's terms of reference, and in the committee where we changed the choracy to include all members contributing to the choracy, not just councillors, that was adopted and approved.
Good. That gives us a bit more flexibility. Fantastic. Sorry, I interrupted.
That's all right. That's all I had. I think, if memory serves, that was all we discussed on unitary. And as previously, the pension fund is as a broadly unitary function already. Hasn't been impacted by the change generally. There's no real changes that have happened. The pension fund has moved from SAP as its finance system to MSD 365 as per the county. But because we're a much smaller entity, the teething issues around that don't really impact us either. And in the interim structure for finance, there's no change at all to the personnel servicing the committee from within my team. There's been a little bit of toing froing within corporate governance, so Steve is with us today, and Neil Meehan, who's been almost as long suffering as I have on pensions committee and board, has been given time off for good behaviour and moved somewhere else.
Fantastic.
But otherwise, no real impacts of unitary.
So will that fall off as a standing item for the committee's agenda?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, because we're there now, aren't we?
Yes. Yes. in all senses of the word.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay, and then they reviewed investment performance, and I know we've got an item on our agenda where we're going to look at that report in some detail today. So
yes, and but more specifically from an angle of how it's constructed as much as
yes.
what's in it.
Yes.
So I'm happy to do it either way and sort of cover what's in it now, or we can do that all together at the end.
Do we do that all together at the end? Is that okay? Yep. Okay, we'll do that all together at the end. And then they reviewed administration performance, which we will do as part of our review. But was there anything in particular that was highlighted in their meeting?
I'm struggling to remember. Shirley is with us from Peninsula, so if Shirley wants to just come in and cover anything particularly relevant she wants to raise.
Hi there, sorry. No, Rachel was at the Somerset committee rather than myself, but she said that the main topic was about the resources, really, and so we're running with 7 missing staff at the moment, although we have used apprentices to help cover that. So I was just going to add that they will, we've actually changed how we look at recruitment, and we have successfully got 40 applicants for our lowest graded position, which normally we've only been getting about 6. So and they're just shortlisting those 40 applicants at the moment, so we'll be interviewing shortly for those. The next level up has not been as good sort of outcome, but we have got a few people there that we think would be suitable, as long as they perform at the interviews. So that's all going on at the moment. That was really the main topic Rachel said had been spoken about there.
Thank you,
Okay.
Shirley. Thank you.
And just to provide context, that's 7 vacancies out of what FTE do you carry at the moment?
We've got 71 FTEs
10%.
approximately, so 10%.
Yeah.
And it's the people that do the work, I would say, rather than the managers or the checkers. It's the people that are actually putting the calculations through that we're behind on.
So I expect we'll cover it in when we look at administration performance later on our agenda. But I expect that's having an onboard impact on your performance figures, is it?
At the moment, it's not showing too bad. I think what the main we've changed a few things as well, but it does impact. We can't do everything as fast as we would like it to be, and it's different. We're moving staff as well, so we're sort of saying, right, we need you to deal with these priorities, so the higher level priorities, we need that dealt with. But then we're also expecting more from our apprentices than we've done in the past, but that may be because we've been hesitant rather than that apprentice's ability, because our previous sort of assistant director of finance who retired in March, he was saying that other areas actually use the apprentices at a much higher level than we do. But we've sort of like before I've been saying they need the background to be able to understand what we want of them. So we've this time around have trialed it slightly different, and some have excelled in it and others aren't doing so well. So it's just that learning part.
Yeah, that's really interesting to know, isn't it? You know, sometimes when you ask someone, require someone to step up, and they do, and they surprise both them and their employer with actually how much they can achieve. So that must be good for them to realise
Yes,
that
yeah,
they can do more than they thought they could. So
yeah.
that's great, Shirley. So we'll come back to you later on our agenda.
Perfect.
But thank you very much. Thank you.
That's fine.
In terms of the committee's business plan update, we covered a few things, mostly around various policies. So the funding strategy statement, which is on your agenda today, discussions that we will bring back the communication strategy once Peninsula have worked through their communication strategy, and then we can amalgamate that into ours. In terms of update on various sort of government initiatives, surprisingly or not surprisingly, we remain in a certain level of torpor. So we've not got anything yet on the TCFD reporting requirements for the LGPS.
Okay.
So that's the Task Force for Financial Related Disclosure, Financial Climate Related Disclosure. We've not had anything on final on McLeod.
Okay.
We've not had anything on correction. We've not had anything formal on changes to the pooling guidance or pooling regulations. There were some elements in the budget book. It wasn't mentioned by Jeremy Hunt at the dispatch box. We've had this before. For some reason, chancellors don't believe that their statements on the LGPS are worthy of actually highlighting at the dispatch box as part of the budget speech, but they do like to tuck them away on page 97 of the budget book. So there was mention of looking at trying to get pools into groups of 50 billion rather than the previously advertised 25, which is somewhat inconvenient because Brunel, we're at about 35, 36. And I think across the partnership, we're unanimous that having put in an awful lot of work over 5 years and sunk a certain amount of cost, just as we were getting to steady state and sort of, a place of where we can maximize those savings, we might be forced to up sticks and change everything again, which would be rather disappointing. But the government have just said something that they might think about, something along the lines of 50 billion. It's quite indistinct at the moment.
Well, bearing in mind that we are or appear to be so far ahead of some other local authorities that have not moved as far as we have towards pooling, that might stick in the craw a little bit.
Yes, but we'll see. And I think to some extent with government, we now have to bear in mind that clearly there are a number of items outstanding. It's not clear that there's sufficient capacity within DLUC to push anything through with any great pace. And we're due an election by, I can't remember if it's by the end of next year or by January 2025 technically, but so it's possible that some things that governments state they wish to do may remain pending for the next government, be it of the same colour or a different one.
Yeah.
And also within the budget book, we've moved on now from the government wishing to encourage us to invest in infrastructure. They're now very keen on us investing in UK private equity or venture capital.
Okay.
And again, no such information as to how they might like us to do that or what they might like us to do. And bearing in mind that the previous wisdom from the previous round where they did encourage us to invest in infrastructure was they can encourage as much as they like, but
Yes.
they can't actually force us to.
Yes, I was going to ask whether they could compel us to do so, but
The general wisdom is not, but on the basis that they write the rules. You never
yes, yeah. The only thing that I noticed outstanding in either of our business plans is the annual employers meeting. Presumably that's not going to happen in April because we're on the last working day of April. So
no, it might happen when I actually get some free time to organise it and prepare for
I
it.
realise that April might have been a bit fraught for you.
Well, in fairness, fraughtness started to build up in March, and it's been a busy couple of months. Not particularly in terms of pension fund issues, although those tick along and I try and stay on top of them. But yes, coming together as unitary for my other responsibilities has taken up a little bit of time.
I can only imagine. So are we sort of looking for summertime for the annual employers meeting, or autumn, or?
We'll get there.
We'll get there. Okay. Well, keep us posted.
We did. I think it was just before Christmas that we pushed out an email to employers asking what format that would be, and we weren't overburdened with feedback, but what we did receive was very clear that there was a definite preference for a online rather than sort of in-person event.
Yeah.
So when we do get round to it, it will definitely be a virtual meeting, not a in-person event somewhere.
I think that's a really good idea. Fantastic. So anything outstanding in the finance and membership statistics update?
No, membership statistics continue to trend as they have for some time, with the active membership being broadly static and the number of deferreds and pensioners generally increasing. In terms of the finance update for the first 9 months of the financial 22-23 year, broadly speaking, there is nothing in that is a significant change from the original prediction. We've got less dividend income in, but since we only anticipated dividend income from property holdings, it's not that significant a number anymore. But most of the other numbers are broadly where we
would
expect, bearing in mind that some numbers, such as transfers in, transfers out, are a bit sort of lumpy and unpredictable by their very nature.
With the move to unitary, are we likely to see a significant reduction in membership over time?
I don't believe so. I mean, I think I'm looking at Nigel because he will have picked in his, with his Unite hat on, will have picked over the numbers heavily. I believe that only 30 posts, is it 30, were predicted to be lost.
Okay.
And the almost exclusively at senior management level. I suspect as teams become reconfigured into their long-term final position, because as mentioned in finance, we're on an interim structure, and I don't believe we'll get a final structure until the autumn, depending on which order they're done, because they're going to be done department by department. I suspect some posts will sort of drift out, but I suspect they will be posts that are already vacant. So, and I've no idea what the FTE of the council is. Any takers?
Over 5,000 under 6, I think.
That's net, not including.
No, I don't
schools.
think that's including schools.
Yeah.
No.
So if we lost another, let's just just me making, I'm very clear, me randomly
Yes.
picking a number out of nowhere with no substance whatsoever, another 200 posts,
It wouldn't have an
I
enormous
don't think
impact.
it would have a noticeable impact overall. Nigel?
Just looking at other unitaries like Wiltshire, Dorset and Cornwall, it's over town at a time when some buildings are closed down, things are rationalised, and then you get a little bit of centralisation, which is bound to happen because that's what happened everywhere else. And then transactional services can all be done in one building and remotely, but that's the nature of local government anyway. So
Yeah. So we might notice something if we look back in 10 years' time. We might have noticed some impact of the move to unitary.
But it's likely to get sort of picked up in the noise, hidden by the noise generally, rather than obvious. And day one, I can guarantee we need everybody we can grab
Yes.
at the moment.
Yes. Fantastic. Right. Well, and we will review the risk register as part of our papers.
And they're other than as I mean, I could do it now. As highlighted in the paper to yours, there is a small tweak to the risk register in that underneath the colour bands, it now states the colour, because the chair of the pensions committee informed me that he is colourblind and had no clue what colours were being displayed. So we made that change.
Yeah, good, fantastic.
So then the review of resources review, financial forecast setting and committee objective setting. We talked about resources to some extent. Obviously, Shirley's commented on Peninsula's resources. If and when the finance structure is finalised, if I am given broadly the same responsibilities I have now, I will probably request some additional manpower for the pension fund. And there was a discussion about the fact that currently the investments team as constituted is not the most diverse age range. And funny enough, we're all getting 1 year older every year, which is quite inconvenient. So we need to improve our succession planning slightly, because at the moment it's somewhat not existing.
Maybe take a lead from Peninsula and have an apprentice.
We probably need something at a far more advanced level than apprentice. So that's a debate to be had when that permanent structure is.
Yes.
Because as I say, at the moment it's pointless me having that debate, because I don't actually know that I'll be given
any more heads.
Well, any more, I might be stripped of tasks.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes.
So
yes. Well, wait and see. Wait and see on that one.
There are always tasks that you look at and think, well, it'd be nice if someone else did that.
especially the boring bits. Yeah. And then you discussed at the committee the cash management strategy.
Yes, so we do this every year. So within the council world, we are required as part of Treasury management to put a Treasury management strategy to full council for approval. And it sets out also the counterparty criteria that we will use for the following year. And so as a matter of good practice, although it's not a requirement, we do something similar. It also, cash management is the last remaining sort of in-house managed area. Therefore, I like to give the committee the option to take that away from us and give it to someone else, take it externally. It probably wouldn't be financially sensible to do so, but we don't want sacred cows or anything.
Yeah.
We want it to be seen that such things are discussed and offered regularly.
Yeah, because there has been some turmoil in the banking sector, Silicon Valley Bank and Credit Suisse, and so having someone external. I mean, I'm only saying that because we've done an exercise in Frome Town Council on a very much smaller basis, but on our cash management and the security of the overnight lodgement of capital, which could be significantly large amounts that we're doling out, especially at the beginning of our precept year. So looking at things like that and the security of the banking sector as a whole, and the Moody's and Standard and Poor's rating of various financial institutions, who does that sort of thing for you?
So as our Treasury management practices, which went through audit committee yesterday,
Yes.
A full 60-page document on how the Somerset Council runs its Treasury function. And again, that's a required document, and it's very much a working document, how things are done practically, not the strategy is much more high level. So we will always retain the knowledge and ability to do that in-house. But we also do, as Somerset Council, buy in a Treasury advisory service from a company called Arling Close. And the pension fund effectively does piggyback on that.
Yes.
Because it's, one could not apply that knowledge for Somerset Council and then not apply it.
Ignore it completely.
Bearing in mind
yes.
that it's exactly the same
Yes.
members of staff doing it
Yes.
on behalf of the pension fund. And indeed, for the pension fund, cash management is slightly simpler.
Yes.
Because
it's known.
Well, no, for the county, sorry. I was doing so well. For Somerset.
You've paid off a bit of that debt.
For Somerset Council, there is the discussion as to whether to use strategic funds and what that balance should be, and what level of risk to take on within Treasury. Whereas for the pension fund, the Treasury is kept very vanilla, because if we don't want cash, then we already have, 10 other options
Yes.
of funds that
Yes.
are readily available as part
Yes.
of our investment portfolio that we can just move things to.
Yes.
So we can keep cash a lot simpler,
Yes.
a lot cleaner,
Yes.
because it should really just be short-term cash.
Yes. Yes.
So in that sense, at the margin, we probably have a simpler and more risk-averse cash strategy
Yes.
for the pension fund. Because if we have the alternative just to invest in equities in a readily set up vehicle that's there waiting for us, and we do from time
That we
to
can
time.
sell down on a daily basis
Yes.
if we need it. Yeah. Fantastic.
And actually, especially as the pension fund hasn't gone unitary, the pension fund's cash flow in terms of contributions coming in on or around the 19th of the month and pensions going out on the last working day, is considerably more predictable
Yes, yes.
and steady than councils,
Yes.
especially when you move to a unitary and you're suddenly getting money coming in and coming out from places that you
All
never
over
knew
the place.
existed.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yeah, fantastic. And I think we've already said enough about knowledge and skills. All things being equal, we'll get a reminder, bit more of a grace period. Please, I urge all members of the board, if you've not done so already, please complete that
And then
questionnaire.
I suspect that the reality is that now, bearing in mind that May will be taken up with the production of the accounts, because we're back on a 31 May deadline for publishing the accounts. It's a strange one. There isn't actually a deadline for the publishment of the pension funds accounts, but they form an annex to Somerset County Council's accounts. No, not in that context, because as at 31 March, they
It's
were
last
still
year's.
Somerset Council, so it's still Somerset County Council's accounts. Next year it will be Somerset Council's. And the County Council does have a statutory 31 May deadline, so we have to comply with that. And that's shorter than last year, when the last few years, because of COVID, we've had a 30th of June deadline, and the 31 May, both for the pension fund and for the county council, and indeed each of the districts which will need to be closed, is very tight. For instance, we will not get the March valuations for some of our private equity funds until about the 14th of May. So effectively, we have about 2 weeks.
To produce a full set of accounts.
And there will be a hold on the note on AVCs, because I know that Prudential and GC not provide their AVC information
Okay.
to us within that timescale. So there'll just be a blank note that says,
TBA, yeah.
here's a table that's got last year's figures in, but not this year's, because they haven't provided it to us yet.
And I presume there weren't any urgent items of business on the committee, so that brings their agenda to a close.
I can't remember any. I probably should say, actually, I forgot it, under the investment piece. There have been some developments at Brunel. You will recall that I circulated the special reserve matters
Yes.
that were voted on. I'm trying to remember when we voted on them now. Was the deadline mid-March? One was on a change to the remuneration policy. One was a update of the strategic priorities at Brunel, and one was the annual budget. The strategic objectives and the budget were approved unanimously as required. One fund voted against the remuneration policy and one abstained. And I don't want to go into too much depth in public session, but the new remuneration policy was broadly requested and by the majority felt necessary, because Brunel is struggling with various recruitment and retention issues currently. And we have now found ourselves in a bit of an impasse where the majority wish that Brunel are, the longer it's not done, the more impact it could have on Brunel. And we're struggling to find within the current governance arrangements a way around that. And so we're having some interesting conversations. And I may well, you will get updates from me as and when I think I have something worth telling you about a direction forward.
Okay.
Because at the moment, every time a direction forward is suggested, somebody doesn't like it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, that's I suppose a downside of pooling. We've got a lot of diverse feelings, opinions amongst our.
Yes,
board.
so it's the nature of collaboration
Yeah,
that sometimes people disagree, and sometimes people very forcefully disagree,
Yeah.
and red lines come in, and all those
yeah.
sort of phrases that sort of are not necessarily helpful. And also, inevitably, in an organisation that's relatively young still, bearing in mind that the original sort of shareholders agreement structures governance and sort of voting rights and unanimity over certain issues and things like that were set up. And this is the first time that it's created a real problem. A sort of, and you know, inevitably when you create a structure like that, you don't foresee all the circumstances that might occur, and you know, we are where we are now, and so we will have to find a way through it. As I say,
I think Anthony wants to say something.
No, I just show I'm listening. As the I'm just wondering because we had a refund issue, didn't we, going back 2-3 months, where we had to reimburse a member because a trade.
Oh, someone had made a keying error. Yeah.
Can we expect to see more of those types of events then, based on what you've just described, and what procedures are they putting in place to try and limit the impacts of these recruitment issues?
so it's the previous issue. So Brunel made a mistake and felt it needed to rectify that mistake. Under the governance arrangements we set up, any insurance payout made by Brunel has to be approved. I think that's only a reserve matter. I think that only needs to be approved at 80%. Given the level of it, because I think it was a fairly de minimis sum from memory. Yes. Yeah. Question mark whether actually that should be a reserve matter at all, and that's, you know, a debate. So I don't believe we will see more of those specifically. You know, a mistake happens, internal audit review it. We reviewed it as part of the process of deeming what process should be put in place, and then as part of approving the payout, it's sort of, yeah, well, we'll approve the payout, but how can we improve processes to make sure this doesn't happen again? So all of that is going on, and I don't believe that specifically in the short term, that is, we're likely to see more of that. If Brunel continue to have trouble recruiting and continue to lose staff, then if it becomes understaffed in its compliance department, then those risks would rise again. Those specific risks around errors leading to sort of claims by the clients. And it's a very strange arrangement because obviously in most companies, the 10 clients aren't exclusively also the 10 shareholders. So that's not specifically the worry around the remuneration policy and retention and recruitment. But there is a general sort of, here's the work that we have asked Brunel to do, and here is their current resources, including vacancies. And we are having a robust debate as to what work Brunel should prioritise, because on the basis that they are not fully staffed at the moment, certain things will have to be put on hold, and very much the focus is on business as usual. So they've got 93% of our assets. Managing those assets that are already transitioned is absolutely the key focus. And actually, as we're one of the funds that has fewer requests for development than others, I'm probably less concerned about the fact that those developments are going to have to be paused than perhaps other funds are.
This is a general observation though. So we've got two third parties providing services for us, both calling out the exact same issues of recruitment, retention, salaries. Is there work going on to look at the construct of the contracts we have with those at the moment, and do they have the flexibility
Service levels and
required
things, yeah.
to give us that level of service? Because obviously inflationary pressures are far greater than we'd have ever envisaged at the point they were written. Do we need to revisit those contracts in order to get the level of service we need and expect going forwards?
They are very, very different contracts. I mean, let's be honest, there is a recruitment and retention issue, certainly across local government and broadly nationally. You know, Brunel doesn't fit necessarily into that first pocket quite. With Peninsula, my understanding of the agreement we have with Devon is it's very much a shared service in a public sector environment. So my colleague Stephen Morton sits on a sort of oversight group where they agree the resources and budget of Peninsula Pensions, and then the costs are split by formula. So they take off the costs or the payments they receive from Avon and Somerset Police to run the police officer scheme and Devon and Somerset Fire to run the fire scheme, and then the remainder is split. I think it's on membership numbers, which basically means it's 1/3 Devon, 1/3 Somerset, 2/3 Devon. And so the ability to increase the size of the team is a relatively short decision making. Effectively, it's 3 people in a room, 4 people in a room saying we need more resources here within reason, because obviously then it goes through the whole sort of process around budget setting and it flows back into conversations about financial forecasting committee and board. With Brunel, it's explicit that the budget is a special reserve matter annually. And as has happened with the remuneration policy, that as a special reserve matter, if one of the 10 partners is not happy and votes against it, it doesn't happen. So there is a lot of negotiation and work that goes on, and there are tensions there. I think it's fair to say that the retention and recruitment environment that Brunel are facing is very different to the one facing local government, because the skills in investment areas appear to be particularly sought after at the moment, and it may well be effect of the pandemic and greater remote working that my understanding is that the market for those skills in Bristol is a lot hotter than it has been historically. Perhaps because actually more people can get a job living in or around Bristol and commute into London 1 day, 2 days a week, and therefore they're no longer really competing with Bristol salaries, they're competing with London salaries as well. And some of the stories I've heard coming out of Brunel as to what people are being offered or are taking as they leave are quite eye-watering. So it's very much then wrapped up in the issues around the remuneration policy, which has some specific things in it that are not helpful, but then it's budget, and there's that robust discussion as to what Brunel needs and what we generally feel is acceptable, but balancing that with local authority budgets. That it's not a direct impact on Somerset Council's budget because it flows through being messed around with by the investment performance and the work of the fund and then through to the contributions. But there is that feedback, and also it's what looks. You know, how much we pay Brunel eventually is absolutely in the public domain in our accounts. Last year it was, I'd have to look it up, but it's in the region of £1 million. Yeah, their original budget this year, I think their original soft proposal to us was something like a 13% uplift. We just said, no, too much. Please go away and think again. And, you know, there was the inevitable haggling process, and we got down to a number that was agreed then by all parties.
I suppose the question there is what you've just described adequately reflected within our risk register at the moment? And I suppose if the answer isn't it's impacting on trades, I didn't quite ascertain what the necessary impact of all of this was on the fund, whether it's going to be more loss incidents, whether it's going to be less effective trade movement as we go on. But when I look at our risk register at the moment, I don't think it's necessarily reflected, especially when those pressures are hitting two of our partners at the moment. No doubt it's hitting your department as well.
So yeah, resourcing. Maybe
I
we'll
mean,
hold that. I noticed
it's-
Shirley had her hand up. I don't know whether
It's
she wants
not
to come in.
affecting my team much at the moment because we're all so old and just can't be bothered to look anymore. And yeah,
Shirley.
Yeah, I mean, I was just basically going to agree with what Anton is saying, and also for the staff that we have lost, they have gone to London pension authorities, but are working basically at home, maybe once a month going into London. And we within Devon and definitely within the finance area saying that we need to collaborate and be in the office twice a week at the moment is what we're saying, which we have been doing since October, and we believe it is more beneficial for the team to do that. So that, and I also know that is nationally across the pension, which is basically what Anton was saying as well, that it's harder to resource, and the money side of it being local government isn't as great as some would like on that side. Okay.
But the pension's very good. Yeah.
so I think generally speaking, I think because retention of key staff is on the risk register, so in that sense, it's sort of there. In terms of what's happening at Brunel, because the issues at Brunel are making of, you know, effectively the partnership reaching a point of disagreement between some of us, as opposed to, and that's the issue. You know, the problems at Brunel, at least Brunel are telling us, are fixable if we approve the remuneration strategy. So it's wrapped up in that. The risk at the moment is within the governance of Brunel and finding a way to get all of the 10 owners happy, rather than a risk inherent. And yes, the longer it goes on, the bigger the problem, the more issues. And we're having, I mean, I attended the client group on Tuesday as usual, and that's a 2-hour meeting, and we had 8 items, and we probably spent an hour and a quarter of the 2-hour meeting trying to work out various ways through the current governance logjam. And then I've got a shareholders meeting that I'm attending on behalf of Jason on Wednesday next week, and we've got, I think, 3 of those booked in May, as we urgently try to find a way through this, but it's not easy.
Point you made there in terms of it's unanimous decision, not majority decision, is going to cause us problems going forward. Sorry, I am on microphone, but apologies if you can't hear.
Yeah.
And one of the debates is, well, is having special reserve matters which require unanimity fit for purpose. And that's a discussion, but we've got an immediate crisis and we've got long-term solutions. And at the moment, we're trying to find a way to get the two to meet somewhere. And some of that may be some short-term solutions and then a longer-term review. I mean, one of the things the shareholders have specifically asked for is actually an annual review of the governance process to make sure it stays fit for purpose, which from an officer point of view actually feels slightly too much, but we're hopeful that if we can get it right, then the annual review will then be quite swift.
Yeah.
But there will be, I think, inevitably this has shown some issues with the governance as set up, and so we will be reviewing that, and I expect there will be changes as opposed to a review that says, no, I think it's all right.
I suppose at the risk of labouring the point, it's just that I would reiterate the question: does the risk register at the moment adequately reflect that risk? What I would hate is in 6 months' time we're paralysed by inaction in Brunel for this reason, and it looks as if we've stumbled into it, whereas the reality is it sounds like we're aware of it and managing it, and how that looks.
Well, we'll maybe come back to that. We'll circle around to that when we look at the risk register on our next agenda item. So I think we can mark the review of the pension committee papers as an agenda item. Yeah. I would say no questions from any of the other board members. So now we come to our review of the pension fund risk register. So let's just review that item in our agenda. So now we've got red, amber and green and actually noted on the risk register. So those of us who are colourblind can interpret that correctly. So always my eye is drawn to the red item, which is the pension fund has insufficient available assets to meet its long-term liabilities. But that's improving as per our latest valuation.
Yes, and I will reiterate my previous comment, and which is highlighted in the introductory paper, in that we do plan to sort of kick the tyres more thoroughly on the risk register this year, review the risks, have a more in-depth discussion of each of the risks and whether the current scoring is appropriate. And so we will pick that up then. And because the risk register appears on both board and committee papers every meeting, the plan is to do that as a informal session jointly.
Yes.
So that we don't get into a situation of creating sort of artificial conflict between board and committee, which
we
would
would
be
never want that.
most inappropriate.
So when are we planning on having that in-depth review?
I refer you to some comments I made sometime.
You're working on it.
I think it's almost certainly going to be the autumn.
Okay, that's fine. Probably better that with holidays coming up and so probably autumn rather than summer would be better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going back to the funding strategy, I mean, there was a report yesterday, wasn't there, in Public Finance that employers' contributions have gone down on average. I just wondered how that would fit into this element.
So that's off the back of Hymans, who are one of the 3 actuary firms that dominate the LGPS, publishing a sort of 2020 valuation sort of overview that included, I think it was 72 of the 86 England and Wales funds. I did look at their outturn, and interestingly, we were not one of the funds included in their survey, despite other Barnett Waddingham clients' results being there. So I don't know. I've not had any conversations with Hymans. I don't know why we weren't in there. But as with the results for the Somerset Fund, looking at it at a fund level and then nationally hides certain things. So it's all very well to say nationally we're better funded. And I think nationally they're saying we're now more than 100% funded. Yes, whereas the Somerset Fund is not 100% funded. And nationally, they're saying there's been a reduction in contribution rates. For some funds, that is not true. For us, it's nuanced. So some of our employers are over 100% funded, and some are not. Somerset Council is not. And the movement on contributions is complicated because the cost of a New Year's service has gone up by about 10%. Also, that charge is made as a percentage of salary. So as salary goes up due to inflation, not matching inflation, but due to inflation, pounds wise contribution levels increase through that as well. The deficit contributions that are paid as a pounds amount, with the deficit reducing by more than anticipated, those have reduced. I can't remember now. In the forecast, financial forecast I worked out in February, whether I believe overall on a cash basis, Somerset Council will pay less than the 5 predecessor councils did last year or not. I think it's probably is slightly less, but broadly marginal. And obviously, because the balance between a set pounds amount and a figure that's variable depending on pay levels and staffing levels has changed, how that develops over the 3 years of this valuation will also therefore change. So it's complicated. And as well as with many things in society, the answer is complicated, and a press source puts out a headline that tries to simplify it, and that isn't always therefore helpful.
Thanks, Anton.
So, any other points other than the ones that Anthony has already made about staffing? That might be something that we want to look at in a more in-depth way when we do our in-depth review in the autumn. But any other points now that we want to bring to the fore so we can start thinking about them before our comprehensive review in the autumn of the risk register?
And I'm quite happy to look at tweak risk PF admin 5.
Yeah.
Because firstly, it does talk about staff turnover, but it doesn't talk about retention and recruitment, which is perhaps a better phrase. So I might look at just tweaking the wording. And I'm quite happy to increase the likelihood score of that, which would perhaps, I'm not sure if that, yes, that would turn it into an amber risk.
Yeah, or even whether it's, and the bloody page number is over it, is it PF Inv 4, failure of Brunel to deliver either fee savings or investment performance, whether that's tweaked to incorporate the pressures they're specifically facing. Because I think it's third party recruitment and retention rather than our own, and I'm not sure if that's what the admin is trying to get at. So
I think
defer to your judgment.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say that the admin one is sort of include. I don't really. I appreciate contractually they are third party, but I don't really look at Peninsula as a third party in that context. Whereas Brunel very much needs to be viewed as a third party. So yes, I'm quite happy to look at both of those and tweak the risk scores.
Fantastic. Well, I think that probably for this meeting brings our discussion of the risk register to a close, unless anyone has any points that they want to make. So I think we can move on to our business plan.
Yep. as per the discussions at the last meeting, we have the funding strategy statement to review in a second. We'll talk about investment performance, how it's calculated, and that sort of bit in a later. The carbon metrics report from Brunel is on the work plan for the July meeting.
Yes, and I was wondering, because I know Brunel have also just published their new carbon strategy, because they've done a carbon stock take over the last couple of years, I think. And I'm wondering whether it would make sense if we include our review of their carbon strategy as part of the July meeting. They sort of go hand in hand, I suppose, the carbon metrics and the strategy that generates those metrics. So I think I'd like to add the review of Brunel's carbon strategy to the July meeting, if we've got time, and I hope we've got time. If we all read them beforehand, and we can come along with our questions and queries to the meeting, I think we've probably got time.
I'll make my bid for the Pedants Society. It's actually their climate change strategy.
Climate change strategy,
Not
it's
their
not their carbon strategy.
Not their carbon.
Sorry, yeah.
But yes,
Thank you for that clarification. Yes.
That's no problem.
Yes.
At this point, we don't have any specific items for the October board meeting. Obviously, there will be a review of the annual report, which will have gone to the September committee.
Yes.
If the passage of the funding strategy statement is not smooth,
yes,
then there is a contingency that it will come back to the board for further discussions in October.
Well, I will
pending when we get there, the communication policy as well.
Oh yes, the communication, yes, engagement strategy. I will point out that in our October meeting there will be an election rather than election of the chair, and it is meant to rotate around us board members. So I will have done it for 2 years, so I'll be looking for someone to step up.
You've done it for 2 terms.
2 terms, beg your pardon, 2 terms.
The first one was not quite a year because of various interactions. I think you managed slightly longer.
Oh God, okay. So I will be looking at other board members to step up to chair. I'm happy to continue.
They like you so much.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a danger, isn't it? But I will be looking to other people to step up. Right. Okay. So please, I encourage you to continue to think about things that are unclear to you, that you want to learn more about. This is our opportunity to learn. So bring forward things for our business plan so that we can examine them in detail and hopefully make things clearer so that we all understand more. Okay, so that's our business plan. We will add to it as we go. So our next item on our agenda is our review of the funding strategy statement. Now, I'm going to go first because there are things in this that I've looked at, and in particular, I suppose, is future price inflation right at 3.2%? Have we moved from low inflation, low interest rates to a new world of high inflation, high interest rates, or is this just a blip? And I don't know.
So the first question I'm going to have is, I didn't think inflation was specifically stated as 3.2%. So I'm going to ask you where that's stated.
Oh, okay. That is in page 10.
So
financial assumptions.
The funding strategy statement is reflecting the inflation figures included within the valuation report. And so I wouldn't say that the funding strategy statement sets those.
Okay,
They are reported in it for information.
right.
So-
Okay, okay.
So that is not something,
So it's historic.
it's reporting what is currently the case
Okay.
or was agreed as part of the valuation. Now, we have to remember that that inflation figure, as per the valuation, is targeted at a length of time consistent with the duration of liabilities. And I appreciate that I've just said a sentence that may mean absolutely nothing to many,
So it's
some, or all of you.
long-term.
So it's basically looking at an expectation of inflation over the next 20 years.
Yes.
If we make a broad assumption that the Bank of England is reasonably successful at obtaining its current target of 2%, then over that timescale, 3% or 3.2 is not unduly incorrect. Clearly, currently, we have significantly higher inflation. If you listen to the Bank of England, and bearing in mind that their past prognostications on the outlook for inflation over 2 years haven't always been as accurate as some would like, I believe they are currently stating that they will return inflation, or their expectation is that inflation will return to their target of 2% within the 2-year time scale of their forecasting period, and that the risks are evenly balanced between underhitting and overhitting that. And that's based on a market expectation of the future path of Bank of England rates that they don't necessarily agree with.
I suppose,
So-
therefore, yeah, well, my follow-on question then is,
And that's why we have a valuation every 3 years, not every
Yes.
20. So that
yes,
when we get there, we can view the impact of that. And it also needs to be borne in mind that inflation impacts the fund in 2 ways.
that's what my question was going to be.
One-
You know, if it is a higher value from
One-
now on, what impact does that have?
All post-14 benefits are linked to inflation
Mm,
explicitly.
mm,
And all benefits in payment
mm.
are linked to inflation, CPI.
With a cap?
No. CPI, the previous September, implemented from April.
Right.
So CPI was 10.1% in September 2022. And so this month, our pensions in payment will increase by 10.1%,
Yes.
all other things being equal. There is also then the unclear link to salaries,
Yes.
because a certain amount of historic benefits untaken are linked to final salary, and a certain amount of benefits are linked in that future expectations of salary increases impact future liabilities that are
Yes.
yet created.
And that impacts contribution rates?
Yes, and yeah, so
Yes.
with wages, the assumption within the valuation typically is that wages increase at 1% over inflation. But wages have not been increasing at 1% over inflation for some time now, and clearly aren't going to increase by that much this year, although they will increase by more than the assumption. So you've got different interplays there. Is it right? Is it wrong? And also, the actuary is very clear in the way that they reach their assumption on inflation. So their starting point is, and has been throughout the period that I've been involved with the fund across 2 different actuaries, that the way they assess inflation is to look at the difference between the yield on inflation-linked gilts and non-inflation linked gilts at the point in the curve of the duration of the liabilities. And so it's very much, it's not my view of inflation, it's not their view of inflation, it's the market's view of inflation.
Yeah.
And the market, if it is functioning perfectly, which is a different debate very much for another day, distills all the information available into a consensus. That's what markets in essence do. So it is the best view of the world as to what
Yes.
UK inflation will be over the next 20 years.
And we don't know.
No.
We don't know whether.
And but then that's why we have a valuation every
Yes.
3 years,
Yes.
because if in that short term we
Yes.
find that inflation stays well above that, then there'll be an explicit cost to that in the short term, and that will be picked up at the next valuation. And also then that might embed a different view of long-term
Yes.
inflation, because part of the problem we have at the moment is we're sort of stuck between economic schools of thought that this is another 70s stagnation, inflation, wage spiral type situation, or it's a blip in the post 2008 sort of, well, actually for Japan, post 1995 or something,
yeah.
sort of shrinking workforce, low growth,
Yes.
low stroke disinflation
Yes.
environment, and that will reassert itself at some point in the next 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I've heard the phrase that, get 10 economists in the room and you'll get 11 opinions. So
Exactly. And so I'm none the wiser as to,
No.
whilst acknowledging the valid claims of both schools of thought, I'm none the wiser as to what actually happens. And so the actuary has taken a reasonable method of
Yes.
coming to that assumption, and therefore
that must be a reasonable figure.
assumption
Yes.
for now.
Okay. Okay. That was my only worry, I suppose, about the funding strategy statement, that, if inflation is way different from that figure, what impact does it have, and what impact does that therefore have on
And
the
that-
funding strategy?
And that even with our funding level at 95%, and bearing in mind that we've also had 1 year of that 3-year cycle to the next valuation, and frankly, we haven't made any investment return at all. In fact, we've probably got small minus. Is why when we come to have that discussion about that risk in the risk register, I will suggest that turning it to green would be hugely ambitious and probably
Yes.
unwise.
Yes.
So,
Darkly amber, at least. Yes.
these things all interact.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. And who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
I suppose, is there any so when you look at those numbers, you do think they are wildly out, especially when we're a year on from that
On
estimate,
22,
and we're
yeah.
still at the levels of high inflation that we were seeing being kicked off effectively at the point this was finalised. Are there any preemptive measures we could be taking or should be considering taking, rather than waiting 2 years, I suppose, catching a falling dagger, so to speak?
within the regulations, it is within our power to request a revaluation of the fund at any time, strictly speaking. Is this more of a crisis than a dozen other things that I've seen in the 20 years I've been doing the job? Unclear. I'm not personally convinced it is. Bearing in mind that the valuations is a super tanker that sort of strolls along merrily over a very long period of time. I not sufficiently personally convinced that a revaluation is necessary, particularly for the larger principal employers. So the employers that this will have most impact on is a small employer that's got 3 members because they took a TUPE contract out when they let a cleaning contract for 3 years that will probably expire within that 3 years. They are far, far more vulnerable to this and the impacts it may or may not have than Somerset Council, which has got 60% of the funds. So somewhere around, try to work out what 60% of 70,000 employees is, it's, let's call it 40,000. So 40,000 of our members are attached to Somerset Council in some way or shape. And that really is a super tanker. And so I don't think it will be a unsolvable problem for us at the next valuation. And so it's probably not worth micromanaging that. And so my general advice would probably be sit with it and just wait for the process to work its way through, because the process should be sufficient.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. In isolation, what we're facing at the moment is probably no worse than 2008, but it's the succession of issues that we've had in a very short space of time, which if you take an isolated view, you'd be spot on. If I look at the government's response in 2008, it was to throw money at it and bail the banks and everything else. Those funds have gone, so there is no lever on which the government can pull, hence why we're seeing so many strikes from so many industries. So I would question, it would definitely depend on what the cost of doing a revaluation would be, and then what potential levers would fall out the back of it. But it's whether or not we can be preemptive without doing a revaluation. Are there any minor levers that we could pull, assuming that that inflation rate was going to be, say, a basis point higher over the 20-year period, for example?
So as a fund, no. Our only legal lever is to say, as an administrating authority, we wish the actuary to do a fresh valuation as at 31st of March 23, bearing in mind that it takes a year. We only, and so if we took that decision now, we might just get new rates for April 24. And that is the only lever we have. Somerset Council or other employers do not have the power to demand a fresh valuation, but they can request it and then we can acquiesce to that request. Similarly, the employers, so again, I'll use the example of Somerset Council as by far our biggest employer. Somerset Council could say, well, to manage the risk that we might get an adverse reaction at the next valuation, we could put more funds in now. I'm going to look at Liz as the resource holder, the portfolio holder for resources, and therefore the political person at the top of the budget. I suspect that that conversation, when funds are extremely tight and there are pressures everywhere, is not going to find massive favour, that the Somerset Council would altruistically decide that its best move is to put more money into the pension fund right now.
I think, Chair, that's a fair summing up. I mean, the issues for the council regarding inflation and for construction and development all across Somerset are huge. I said this afternoon I'll be at a town deal board, and we're seeing only too clearly what's happening with inflation in the construction industry is running a lot more than 10%, and sometimes changes by the day and the week. So there are those pressures on the new council, and there are many other pressures on the new council. The pay award for the current year is not agreed yet. I wouldn't want to put that to the 151 officer at the moment. I don't think it would be well received. And there are, I think you could go around in a very large circle, pick up all of these concerns about recruitment, retention, salary levels, inflation, other pressures, the pension fund, and come back round and have the same concerns at every point of that circle.
The difference here though is, so we know if we're linked to CPI for drawdowns increase 10%. Salaries, best you're probably going to get is 5 to 6%. So we already know there's a 4% delta contribution versus drawdown. That's only going to grow as more people live longer with fewer people paying in. And I'm asking the question, is there anything preventative we could do now rather than stare down the barrel of a bigger deficit in 2 years' time?
So we could take that decision to trigger the valuation. I suppose my view would be, do I think that at the next valuation, as we stand today, so still 2 years to go, so lots of risks on both sides, do I think the likelihood is that we will probably be at less than 95% at that valuation? I think we probably will. That would be my current steer. Do I think we are going to be at less than 86% that we were at the 2019 valuation? Probably not, on balance, currently. And therefore, would that reduction be manageable within the scope of the valuation and the levers that the actuary has at that time? I think it probably will be, and therefore it's reasonable to wait until that point.
Could you use your mic? Yep.
The only question I'd like to ask is there any possibility that sometime in the future, given the fact that the Bank of England and everybody seems to have a different idea what the inflation rate is there a possibility perhaps that there might be consideration for contributions to be increased? I'm not requesting it, I'm just asking whether
that would fall out from a valuation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point of the valuation.
Yeah.
It sets the contribution rates.
Yeah, but the concern I have is, of course, those of us who are fortunate enough to be experienced about working in local government or the civil service are very fortunate with their pensions to a certain extent, because outside in the private sector, many people have their pensions, whereas I think with 10%, they may only get 3 or 4%, depending on where they are. And obviously there will be some pressure, I suspect, in the future about this whole consideration of what contributions are made, and also whether we can afford to continue to carry on paying the pensions we are. It concerns me at the moment that, you know, we do have to wait and see what is going to happen, but it seems a very volatile state of affairs. It's not entirely like 2008. I think there's a little bit of difference there, because obviously this has been caused by a number of factors, whether you call it Brexit or whether you call it the war in Ukraine, or it's been caused by energy crisis and all the rest of it. And the question in the construction industry now is, it's a very difficult one because prices are going up all the time with commodities, with a question of commodities. But I'm looking really at how we can actually safeguard ourselves, because if you're saying that this takes about a year to consider this question of being re-evaluation, it is a question of waiting and see. But of course, we're getting mixed messages about this question of inflation, which has a huge bearing on things. Some people think we're in a recession.
I think what you're talking about there, Rod, is would we move away from a care funded, so career average,
That's right.
and so what move away from a defined benefit pension scheme, and I think that's a big shift.
I know, but what we're saying is that what I'm trying to say to you is that, you know, there is this aging population, there is this pressure, perhaps, on the existing people. Many people have 2 or 3 jobs now, and I've heard of people working 14-hour days and all sorts of other things outside in the private sector. And it does seem to me that there's a lot of pressure on all this at the moment for all of you. And I think that I don't know how we can actually wait and see with this, because it seems to have such a crucial bearing on all of us. Perhaps this uncertainty, you know, it's whether we take the government's view, or whether we look to the banking sector, or, you know, the Bank of England, it seems a very sort of precarious situation.
But as Anton
Yeah.
says, I mean, the actuary is not just looking at the
No,
Bank
no,
of England
no,
or the
it's-
government. It's looking at the market, and
know,
and
I
the,
know.
the the efficient market theory is the market
It-
knows best.
Is the market efficient? That's the big question.
It's as good as anything.
Right.
And I appreciate Anthony's earlier comments about the disparity between inflation and pay rises, but pay does go up.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, if you go back over 40 years, pay actually goes up in advance of inflation. The long-term trend has always been that pay increases at a rate faster than inflation. And also, when we're talking about pay inflation within the context of the LGPS, you also have to bear in mind that that does include promotion.
Yeah.
So the person who starts a career on a relatively junior grade at 25 grand quite often seeks and gains promotion at some point in their career, and some of those people may even end up as very senior officers. So as pay inflation happens, because employer and employee contributions are based on a percentage of that, the amount being paid in does increase as well. There is always a mismatch between inflation and pay growth, one way or the other. But we're managing the mismatch, not the full weight of current inflation. So there is, in pounds tense, there is a self-righting mechanism within the fund. Obviously, as part of the valuation, that does address whether employer contributions should increase or not over time. But what is likely to happen here is that, again, my central guess would be that in 2 years' time, when we do the next valuation, the future expectation of inflation won't be massively different. So it might be 4 or 4.5% rather than 3, but I'd be very surprised if it is 10%, that inflation embeds itself so well that we start seeing 10% as the norm again. And so actually the primary contributions, the contributions for new service that are done as a percentage of payroll, will probably not be materially different because of inflation, but we'll have some catch up to do. So the deficit recovery contributions will increase. All other questions about how much employees should pay in and the structure of the scheme are with government. They're not within our gift, and I think it would be counterproductive to discuss that until government changes its mind, opens that particular box again, and comes out with a consultation. I mean, it's always within the committee's remit. I'd say it's the committees, not the boards. Yeah. Obviously, they would take advisement from the board to lobby government for things that the government is no longer not currently explicitly considering, but lobbying governments for things that they're not currently considering in an area as sort of quiet and backwater as the LGPS. I would suggest
we might be shouting into a void.
Is a somewhat futile exercise, and I would say that about pretty much any government.
Well, I think all my concern was is that, you know, we were talking about the disparities, if you like, between you know, private pensions and also with local government pensions and civil service pensions. It is a little bit of a concern, and you know, obviously the whole question is the argument's been made for not giving people pay rises. We simply haven't got the money. You see, so it follows that someone else may also take a certain amount of flack as well at some stage, and that's really my concern. But you know, you've answered it very well, so I think you can end it on that. Really.
Well, and even this morning I was reading certain elements of the press suggesting that it wasn't in reference to local government. It was, I think, in reference to the teachers' strike. That their pensions are so generous that they shouldn't receive a pay, particularly more generous than is on offer pay award. I'll leave it for you to guess which wing of the media that came from. And I think it is probably poorly understood, the value of government pensions, but it's explicit what the value is. It's the employer contribution, which for Somerset Council is 20.1%. So that is the value to me of that element. That is an element of my pay. And yes, I work in pensions, so I am hugely aware of it and cognizant of it, and look at it as part of my overall pay package when considering what else I could get somewhere else. But you know, yes, that is a portion of it, but trust me, certainly in my industry, that in no way, shape or form compensates for the differential in pay.
I think it comes back to our relative age. I mean, when you're young and just starting out, pension is so far away that the fact that you're having a contribution of 20% of your salary towards your pension means absolutely nothing. But as we age, it becomes much closer. And then you think, wow, if you've worked in local government all your life, you then think, wow, I'm really fortunate. I've got a very good pension. But it doesn't mean anything when you're 18 and just starting out. Yeah.
But the value of it is very clear. It's
Yes.
20.1% of pay.
Absolutely, and it's a recruitment point. You know, going back to the problems of retention and recruitment, the fact that you are getting 20% of your salary contributing towards your pension, and then when you get there, it's a defined benefit scheme. It could be shouted much more loudly, but people don't care about pensions, present company accepted.
And ultimately,
Liz has a point, and so does Shirley. Yeah.
I think the HR department here has been talking quite considerably about the benefits of pension scheme here when they've been looking at recruitment. I think that has changed quite a bit, and I think it's changed quite a bit for younger people too.
Yes. Yeah. And Shirley.
Hi, yeah, I was just going to say, as well as sort of like the independent funds, so Somerset Fund looking at their own side of things, nationally, there is a cost mechanism looking at the local government scheme, which looks at the standard rates that employers pay and the rates that the members pay. And when it looks at that, if it breaches certain levels, then either of those rates can change or the benefits can change. For ease, the simplest one for the care scheme, where it's like 1/49th at the moment, that could alter to 1/53rd, for example. So that is also relatively looked at on a national basis as well, to make sure how the government sees it as affordable. Not saying it is for employers in total, but that's what's behind it.
Yes, I'll happily comment on the cost sharing mechanism, because that is there and it's an explicit mechanism. Shirley might just disagree with me if I've got this wrong. My understanding is that the cost mechanism out of the 2016 valuation, because of McLeod, is yet to be agreed. So we're two valuations behind on that cost mechanism actually being implemented to change benefits, because the initial review of the 2016 package surprised everyone in the cost mechanism suggested that the employees had been paying in too much and therefore that benefits should be increased. But then McLeod came along and it got very complicated, and it hasn't managed to find its way out of that complication yet.
Yeah, and just be clear, I mean, I'm not looking to enter the debate as to whether or not there's a good pension or a bad pension here, and whether or not the council should be paying more. What I am looking at, though, is a perfect storm of the market's been crap for 12, 18 months.
And inflation is high.
Inflation is high, and what I don't want to do is look down the barrel of, my God, how have we stumbled into a massive deficit, and a perfect storm of, we're not getting in as much, we're spending out as much, and the fund has performed badly, so therefore it's not going to grow as much when we get the good times, is now an opportune time to say, right, do we get, I don't know, 0.5% increase from contribution from current employees
Yeah.
to offset that gap?
Employers.
Sorry. To offset that gap rather than stumbling into a crisis in 18 months' time.
Unfortunately, what that would involve is a knock-on impacts on the preset amount and council tax, and which adds to inflation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And whilst I don't deny that it's a both linked and very useful debate, we've not actually been discussing the funding strategy statement as written. Is there any other questions on the funding strategy statement? And do you want me to talk you through the specific change that has been made?
Well, I personally, I read the specific parts that had changed, so the McLeod, the GMP, and the cessation valuations. And my understanding, particularly for the cessation valuations, it's just changing the methodology used so that it's using the same methodology as the valuation that the actuary does, rather than gilt yield, so it's less volatile. Is that a summary?
So from the fund's point of view, the benefit is that because the two are consistent in approach, it's more likely to give an outcome that is consistently prudent to us over time. Because there have been times in the last year where using gilt yields would actually have given rise to a result that was distinctly imprudent. From employers, the benefit is the consistency of it. It makes it more easy to plan, because what can happen is they can ask for a indicative cessation valuation to aid their planning, and we give them a number, and then because of the volatility of gilt yields, the actual result when they ask 6 months later is completely different, and that's not necessarily helpful to them.
No.
Are there any specific changes or comments on the text as it goes forward next to committee? It will then go out to employers. We are required by the regulations to consult employers on any changes to the funding strategy statement. So it will go out to employers post committee seeing it, with or without any amendments that you or committee suggest, and then come back through committee for final approval. And I would only bring it back to board if there is substantive change as part of that process.
Yeah. I don't have any further statements other than that very useful discussion about future inflation and what that might look like and what impact that might have on our funding. But I'm looking to my fellow board members and looking on the screen, and I think we can mark that one as done. Excellent. So our next item on our agenda is investment performance calculation and monitoring. And again, I've got some requests. Oh, was that Rachel, or did you want to say something, Rachel? No, just saying hello. Okay, fine.
Depending how long you think this item might last, I might request a comfort break.
Okay. I don't know. I've got a few requests, but I don't envisage it taking much longer than 15 minutes.
Okay, let's crack on then.
Let's crack on. Oh, Nigel.
Nigel.
Okay. He was looking forward to a
So
break.
before we sort of look at the report, I'm going to go right back to first principles and just do a sort of Janet and John of how we get to investment performance.
Good.
So specifically, I'm going to look at the section 1.1 of the committee appendix, where it shows the quarter to the 31st December 22 for the Brunel Passive Fund. So you've got a number there of return for the quarter of 1.8%. So what is in that number? in the simplest terms, it's just the percentage change in value. So for a stock that has not paid any dividends, we've not bought any and we've not sold any, it really is just the percentage change in value. If they've paid a dividend, then typically what will happen to a stock if you pay a dividend is they had 1 billion in their company as cash, they pay out 1 billion, the company is now worth 1 billion less, all other things being equal. And so you need to add back that dividend to your return, otherwise you get a false result. So
DRIP, dividend reinvestment. Yes.
well, no, not in that context,
Okay.
but if your closing valuation is 550, you then add back in the dividend received in the income received in the period to your 550, so that might turn to 575 compared to your start point of 500. If you've bought some, you need to adjust for that as well, because you've increased, if you buy 20 million pounds worth, you've increased your value by 20 million, but that's not investment performance, that's you just adding 20 million pounds worth of money. And similarly, if you take 20 million pounds out, so you make adjustments for that. Yes. Technically on my spreadsheet, I also make adjustments for fees.
Yes.
Most of the fees within Brunel funds are actually taken from within the investment, so I don't have to adjust for them. But any external fees, custody fees, fund manager fees, etc., I take all those out as well. That's a further adjustment.
So that's performance after charges, fees.
And so it's not quite just a simple change of valuation. There is quite a lot that builds up into that in my spreadsheet into a nice long formula that if I showed you to it, you'd look at it and just go, what on earth is going on there? And similarly, you know, what is a benchmark in this context and how does that measure performance? So most benchmarks we use are what's known as cap weighted benchmarks.
Yes.
So what they will do is, let's say there's two companies and the market capitalization of company one is 100 million pounds. So that would be the share price times all shares in issue.
So it's a measure of how big that company is.
It's the value on the stock market of that company. So what an index will do, if you've got two companies, it will add the market capitalization of both of them together and then divide it by itself at inception to call it 100. And then as their market cap goes up, the index goes up the same way. And obviously it's balanced between the two. So if one is bigger, their changing value will be more important. And again, it's then adjusted for investments. And that's how the FTSE 100 works, the S&P 500, and most of the benchmarks we do. It's not actually that technical a process. You can run it on a spreadsheet. And actually, in a past life, for a specific purpose, I did run it on a spreadsheet for 3 years, a particular index of 8 or 9 stocks. So those are the two components there. And then obviously, we talk about relative performance between the two.
Yes, but as this is a passive fund, those will always be the same?
The aim is that they will be the same.
Okay.
There isn't some magic wand that says by definition they must be the same. And actually, it depends to what level of accuracy you measure it.
How much rounding there is. Yes.
So when I produce the figures to you for the quarter to 1 decimal place, they do tend to match. And even over, if we just scroll down slightly and look at the 3-year number, because that's the longest that particular fund has been live, it is broadly in line, but the more decimal places you go to, inevitably there is a difference. So that's just how we construct those numbers. And then that's one fund, then one pocket or one sub fund with it. The overall number is literally just add it all together.
Yes.
And you, or for the benchmarks, you weight the percentage changes. So if there's two that are 50-50 and one goes up by 75% and one goes up by 20%, then the overall weighting would be 50% increase.
Right. So now
so that's just the base of how it builds.
Now we come to a measure that I personally would find useful with all of our funds is how volatile they are. How much up and down, how much risk do we face with that particular subset of the overall pension fund? And what I would find useful is for each of our investments is standard deviation. Would it be simple to go for the underlying fund and from their fact sheet draw out the standard deviation?
No,
Okay.
we don't tend to produce it, or it's not tended to be produced or asked for. Yeah, I've got to be careful here. Because I have a finance degree, and so I looked at
Yes.
standard deviations and things 30 years ago, and I've been sort of living with the consequences ever since. And so I don't want to, but I suspect now I'm going to give you my opinion on it. Volatility is a risk to us. And it is a very measurable risk, and therefore it dominates academic research of what risk in financial markets is. It is a really poor definition of our risk. Pension fund really doesn't mind whether something goes up by 10% and down 10% in over a 2-year period, because we're a long-term investor, and all we're interested in is the fact that actually it went up by 0.5% when a net of the two. The level of volatility is a very, very poor mechanism for defining our risk. It's out there. It's used a lot because it's really easy to calculate. Yeah, you do the daily volatility, you take the standard deviation, you go, oh, it's moved a lot, it's risky. And then people build that into correlation matrices of risk and say, oh, so we can balance our risk because historically the volatility between bonds and equities is really different. And that's true, apart from the point at which crisis hits, like the GFC, like COVID, and everything tanks together. And all those historic covariance matrices just prove that they were just don't hold. When put under pressure, don't hold. So if you want standard deviation, it can be calculated. I hesitate because the problem with the funds we invest in. So typically the Brunel funds, because of how we use them, and are only priced monthly. So the data set of their actual volatility is very small. We can use a data set based on the index. I'm sure I could get you something. I don't think it really defines the risk you should be managing. But if you want it, I shall produce it because I shouldn't bend you to my will.
Well, I come from a similar world, and I'm used to judging risk against reward. I'm used to looking at that efficient frontier. I'm used to looking at how much risk are we taking? What yield are we getting? Is this right in our universe, which is the universe of the Brunel funds? I'd quite like to see the universe of the Brunel funds with their yield against standard deviation. That would help me.
And I should also caveat it. Our major employers, so pretty much all government entities, especially in a local government context, the impact of that volatility on their balance sheet each year is significant, because the pensions element of Somerset Council's accounts varies widely and the number moves and it's a big number. The implications of that are zero. So both as a fund and our major employers, that volatility has no impact whatsoever. And that's why it's a risk we shouldn't concentrate on or manage. That's why I'm not bothered by it, because it has no consequence. Now, if you're a company and someone looks at your balance sheet every year and it goes up by £1 billion or down, that has implications because your share price will move based on your pensions contributions, and you don't want that, and that's why they've all switched to DC schemes. I'm rambling slightly, but for the,
Well,
I can guarantee you,
it
Liz might
has-
get a question at audit committee about the pensions liability, which then I would probably almost certainly answer on her behalf, and she'll be grateful to me and smile. But in the wider context, no one's out there going, oh, they've got pensions liability on their benchmark, on their balance sheet, they must be bust. Or the
No,
council is, it's just not the way we're constructed.
Yeah, given all of that, but the amount of risk that we take, investment risk that we take with the pension funds, there is a relationship between the risk and the yield that we get. If we wanted to look at the impact on our funding strategy statement that the investment strategy statement has, if we started to take a lot more risk, we ought to see a greater return on that. And I just would like the reassurance that all of the investments that we make are for long-term growth. We are not taking excessive risk. We are getting a yield that is appropriate according to the low amount of risk that we are taking.
I mean, that is all valid. And I just don't think you're going to get the answer because I stick a standard deviation number on the bottom of each fund.
Okay. Well, and another measure that might help
And that I almost certainly will diss
is maximum drawdown for each fund.
So the problem I have with maximum drawdown.
Shall we explain what maximum drawdown is?
So the theory of maximum drawdown is the amount that of value that fund might fall by.
Has fallen by in the past measure.
And therein lies the rub.
That it is historic.
It's historic,
But
and
all performance figures are historic.
yeah, but again, you will get various numbers. At the point at which we are massively harvesting our investment fund, so we're drawing out 10% a year, maximum drawdown and volatility become more important to us because we don't want to sell at points when our assets are undervalued compared to where they might be in 6 months' time. That is not the case currently. So if our investment fund falls by 20%, as it did in the first weeks of COVID, the impact on our day-to-day operations is zero, because we are a long-term investor. Over the time frame that we should focus, by definition, our maximum drawdown is everything.
Yeah.
And so again, to talk about maximum drawdown on a 3-month basis, where it says historically we found that you might lose 4.5% on this fund.
Maybe not on a 3-month basis, but on if we reported on a rolling annual basis, maximum drawdown again would, I think, help me and possibly my colleagues, just having an understanding of what volatility we should expect, what falls are expected, so that when we're looking at an investment performance report and we see minus 5.3, we can think, oh, that's okay, because historically it's fallen by much more than that, and there hasn't been a problem. And I think it would just give us a bit more of a wider context to explain the figures that we're looking at.
And that's why I would always encourage you to concentrate on the controllables. So there's two elements to performance. If you're interested in, are the professionals that we have hired doing a good job, the only thing that's relevant is relative performance. The actual performance is only relevant at the whole fund level as we talk about its implications for the next valuation.
Okay, so we're only interested in relative performance. What might be therefore useful is to have the relative performance of the rest of the Brunel universe. So if we can see how the funds that we're investing in compare to the rest of what Brunel's doing. And then then that gives us, again, the confidence that, yeah, we're doing okay, because what we're doing in the funds that we're invested in are keeping up with the other funds that Brunel are managing.
And I don't provide that in the pack, but I do provide it to you by email every quarter.
And the reason that it's not in the pack?
As much as anything, because no one's ever requested it historically, partly because the situation was different, because now we effectively have a limited pool of alternatives defined by Brunel, whereas previously we had an
The world was our oyster.
we had an
yes.
infinite level of alternatives. And partly because it's not necessary for to meet our sort of general information to the world, because part of what I put in these papers is to keep you informed
Yes.
and to meet your needs, but it also meets our wider disclosure
Yes.
sort of
Yes.
not requirements, because the only disclosure requirements we have are within the annual report, but it generally speaking puts a level of disclosure in the public domain that saves me an awful lot of questions under FOI.
So, well, what about including it as an appendix then? Just so that we've got some terms of reference that we can say, look, this is what we're doing. Oh, and look at what the rest of the world is doing, or at least what the rest of Brunel is doing.
So I can, absolutely, and some of the other funds do. However, I should caution you that there are two versions of the report that are produced by Brunel. The one that I provide to you currently is the full version. A slightly more condensed version is agreed by the partnership for public
Yes.
availability.
And that would be the only one that I think would be appropriate to include in our pack. But I think I just need a little bit more to know that what we're doing is keeping up, and I'm sure it is, but I just want to be able to see that, I suppose.
I think, to be fair though, I mean, we've got to keep in mind our job is not to choose the funds to invest in. It's to get a view that we're getting good value for money from Brunel, that they're choosing the right things on our behalf. So, well, we're never going to be in a position where we're saying we should be invested in that fund as a board. That's what we pay them to give us the expertise, tell us which we should be invested in.
So no, under the way Brunel is constructed, Brunel creates portfolios in distinct areas. It is each fund client of Brunel's decision as to how much to place in each pot. And that is explicitly dealt with by our investment strategy statement. That is the document that says this is what the Somerset Fund Pensions Committee explicitly has decided it wants in each pot.
So we do guide them.
From the perspective of though renewables, clean, construction, we don't say
No.
I want to invest in Intel or I want to go for
No.
Microsoft or
No,
whoever.
your choice is definitely between the 20, I think it's 25 different Brunel portfolios of which we're invested in. I'd have to count them up. Is it 12? So some numbers of that proportion.
Yeah, and I think it would be useful to know, taken as a collective, because we should presumably be beating at least inflation. over the long term as a minimum, because otherwise it means we've lost money. It's not an investment. We just as well have spent it.
And there is a graph on that in the annual report, which shows our performance against inflation on, I think it's 1, 3, 5, 10 and 20 years.
So, more information is better than less. We don't have to print it out every time. We can have it in the appendix, but it's just giving all of us, board members and committee members, just the reassurance that we're doing the right thing as much as we can have that reassurance.
I can add it.
Well, I mean, we're
I need to
we're
have-
not the decision maker. We are suggesting to the committee that this might be useful information for them to review.
No, I'm not sure that is what you're saying.
Okay.
I think what you're saying is, as a board, you'd like that Brunel paper to be included in your papers as an additional piece of information that board is requesting. And now I might then go back to committee and say, board have requested this.
Yes.
Do you want it in yours as well?
Yes,
But I think what you're saying is as board, we want this.
I'm saying I want it.
And
Do my colleagues agree? They probably don't. But
And therefore, the way to provide it to board is part of board's papers, because
Yes.
committee haven't requested it,
Yeah.
might not want it.
yeah. Okay, I'm going to request it. Nigel's nodding, so he wants it too. There you go.
I'll
I better read it now.
assuming I remember, which usually I get prompted by reading the thing as-
minutes.
the minutes as well. I will put that in the Brunel's general performance report. I've got to go back and recheck it, which reports show what, because they do one specific to us, which actually brings me, I should, before we finish on performance, I
Yes.
should put in a general health warning.
Yes,
Investment performance is not truth.
agreed.
There are differing ways of producing a percentage return. I know that sounds odd, but it is true. So if you look at the performance numbers I produce and compare them to the same portfolio within Brunel, you may get a different answer. And sometimes the reason for that is clear. So if you look at the most recent quarter to March, there will be a different answer for the sterling corporate bond portfolio in our results to Brunel. That's because we put in £20 million during the quarter, which is about 10% of our investment in that. So it's a substantial change in value. The timing of that makes a difference to your return over the period. So that's, but, you know, if you look at it, it might also say that one portfolio I've got down 2.4 and they've got 2.5.
Yeah,
That's because we've used slightly different methods over slightly
it on a
different periods to produce
different
the
day.
number.
Yeah,
So it's not truth, it's an indication.
yes.
And I'm not, when producing it, I am being mathematically accurate according to the methodology I have used. And I'm more comfortable giving you my numbers that I've calculated because
Rather than just lifting it from Brunel.
because I can tell you exactly what is and isn't in them,
Yeah.
and exactly how I have calculated and the benefits and weaknesses thereof.
Yeah.
So
No,
I'm
that's
happy.
perfect. That's perfect.
But
That's perfect.
there is
Yeah.
no such thing as sort of
Truth.
truth fact. It's a mathematical interpretation of data
Yeah,
in a specific methodology, and different methodologies can be chosen and are not necessarily less valid.
fine. Right. I think
Important health warning.
we've had a very useful discussion there, and I'm aware that I've gone 10 minutes over my promised time of 15-minute discussion, but thank you. I really enjoyed that, and I really benefited from that discussion. I hope you did too. Are there any urgent matters of business that we should discuss before I draw this meeting to a close?
Just a quick one.
Yes.
Can we have the mathematical model you mentioned earlier behind the spreadsheet? Or could I have it?
So you'd like the spreadsheet where I calculate the performance?
And the calculations and the assumptions.
Spreadsheet man.
So the assumptions are not written down because it's things, some of it would be implied from the spreadsheet. So I only calculate performance monthly based on a monthly change. Where the data's available, so if a fund manager would value daily and roll forward daily valuations rather than, and you'd get a different result because you roll forward. So some of it is implied within there, but I will happily, once you've had the spreadsheet and looked at it,
And then you can apply it to your own portfolio, Nigel.
if you then want to ask me how it's constructed in where individual numbers come from and why I choose to do it as I've chosen to do it, I'm quite happy to sit down and have that conversation with you. But I don't have a written document which says, here are the assumptions, because I inherited the spreadsheet and then I've changed it numerous times as various things have come across. But I'll ping you the spreadsheet. If you can follow the spreadsheet, good luck to you.
Right. On that note, I will draw this meeting to a close. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks for those of you who've attended remotely, and I will look forward to seeing you all on the 7th of July. Fantastic.
Thank you.